and not the court.
Curt, you're right. We screwed up twice, but we're not going to change it. We're going to leave it up to Congress, which has no chance of changing it. It's an embarrassing decision.
The court had become much more conservative and much more willing to keep this situation regarding antitrust that applied to all other professional sports, but not to baseball. It's crazy.
Yet Flood had lost by the narrowest of margins. Justice Lewis Powell, on Flood's side after an initial vote, withdrew from the case because he owned stock in Anheuser-Busch, a conflict of interest. The resulting 4-4 deadlock was broken only after Chief Justice Warren Burger switched his vote at the 11th hour.
Flood lost on quirks. And given the vote switching that went on, given that it was a really close case, a good oral argument, and Flood would have won the case.
In my mind, we were never going to win anyway, and could now just check off another way of doing something about the reserve clause.
What's this going to do to Curt Flood?
Well, I guess Curt is going to have to consider where he goes and what he does on his own at this point.
Well, I telephoned him. He felt the color of his skin was a factor here. If the player had been a white player, he kept believing that it would have a different result. I told him I thought that was absurd.
Curt may not have been emotionally prepared for the decision.
In the history of man, there's no other profession except slavery.
And everything that happened after argued that he wasn't emotionally prepared.
It just seemed to me as though 1 week he was there and a few minutes later he was gone.
The dark brown shades of my skin.
The Spanish police closed down his bar, and he just disappears from Mallorca.
Only add color to my tears.
After 4 years in Spain, Flood soon resurfaced in the tiny neighboring country of Andorra. There, high in the Pyrenees Mountains, his life quickly spiraled downward.
Looking back over my false dreams that I once knew.
The police catch him trying to steal from an Andorran department store.
Is it because I'm black?
They break his left arm and throw him in jail.
Somebody tell me, what can I do? Will I survive or will I die?
By the time he goes to the Barcelona psychiatric hospital, the State Department gets word.
In this world of no pity, I was raised in the ghettos of the city. Yeah, oh Lord.
I sent the money for him to come home. When he came home, he didn't have anything except what he had in his arm. I think he had a dog and the clothes he had on, and that was about it.
Something is holding me back.
It was difficult getting the real deal about exactly what happened. He hardly admitted being in a psychiatric hospital. Curtis was the kind of person who, no bad news.
But Karen Brecker, who worked with Flood's sister at a local welfare agency, knew a desperate case when she saw one. She met Flood when he was living with his mother and began dating him soon after a dubious accident in which he'd fractured his skull following a drunken fall from his roof.
I think he was trying to kill himself. He was cataclysmically depressed. He said to me, "Get me out of here." So I said, okay.
A labor arbitrator handed down a ruling today that could shake the foundations of organized baseball. Pitchers Andy Messersmith of the Los Angeles Dodgers and Dave McNally of the Montreal Expos were declared free agents.
In the years since Flood had sued baseball, Marvin Miller and the union had forged forward in the battle for free agency. Not through the legal system as Flood had tried, but through collective bargaining, which among other things had won players the right to have an independent arbitrator decide their grievances. And in 1975, after Andy Messersmith and Dave McNally played a whole season without contracts, they, aided by Miller, filed a grievance claiming they were free agents.
From the very beginning, we always thought it was quite clear. The contract provided the club can renew the contract for 1 year. That's it.
And just as the union had hoped, an independent arbitrator released them from their contracts. Baseball's reserve system had been destroyed 6 years after Flood had hurled the first stone.
Flood's lawsuit changed the climate of public opinion about free agency. It raised the awareness that this system isn't fair.
It opened the door. Then there had to be some other people that had some guts too.
The Flood case, at the very least, gave impetus to getting impartial arbitration of grievances. And that, in turn, led to the Messersmith-McNally case.
The thoughtful players gave Curt Flood at least a modicum of credit.
But that provided nary a modicum of solace for Flood himself.
He's completely estranged from the game of baseball, and everything that he fought for, he's never going to see the benefit of any of it. It's now really hitting home.
What do you want to do now?
Well, I'm going to manage a Little League team, believe it or not. And that's really all I want to do.
He loved baseball. The proudest thing was his card that got him into the games for free.
Don't you want to get back into Major League Baseball?
Yes, but I don't think that Major League Baseball is ready for me.
How you doing?
Curt wants a job in baseball,
You remember me?
but he wants some measure of self-respect. And I also think he wants to not be the guy who sued baseball anymore. He wants to move on.
Letters were written to Los Angeles, San Francisco, even to the Bushes, saying, "Hi, how are you? I'm back in town. I'd love a job." There was a couple of responses. "Sorry, no positions available. Good luck."
When 20 people own an industry, it's very easy for them to keep me out of baseball.
You think that's happening?
Probably.
I remember him coming back. And I remember his struggle in Oakland, trying to reinvent himself.
Searching for a new identity, Flood received a lead in 1978 when his old benefactor, Sam Berkovich, bought the radio rights to Renegade owner Charlie Finley's Oakland A's.
He was very happy when we did give him the job. People thought it was a mistake, but it was our choice.
This is Bud Foster, along with Curt Flood.
Flood had returned to the game he loved. But once inside the ballpark, the man who'd been baseball's loudest critic found trouble summoning his voice.
He knew he wasn't doing very well, but he was trying to keep it going.
You could have gotten a strike call on that, Curt. It was left.
They'd ask him a question, and there'd be silence. He's counting clouds or doing something, but he's not broadcasting.
He was so fearful. He was more like the Curt Flood in the courtroom in 1970. But he was still really battling his demons with alcohol.
He sort of was like a 24/7 drinker, vodka drinker.
It was extraordinary to see somebody drinking that way, but there was no slurred speech or gaps in reasoning.
And he turned his back 3/4 of the infield, and he made a fine running catch.
For years, he'd had a drinking problem, even way back when he was playing baseball.
I think he was drinking before baseball. And he wasn't the only one in our family that had a drinking problem. My grandmother drank and spit tobacco.
But his drinking, as far as he was concerned, wasn't a problem. He never acknowledged that he couldn't function. He thought he could.
That is the end of the top half.
The radio gig was up after just one season. But around this time, Flood turned to another piece of his past in an effort to improve his present.
He thought that by resurrecting his painting, he could generate some income.
Sam Berkovich helped him start the business again. But the way he started it was by sending photographs down to an artist in Los Angeles. That artist was the one who was painting the portraits. It wasn't Curt Flood.
He would send the picture down. They would blow it up and paint over it. Send them back framed. Curtis would sign his name, and that was the deal.
It was a practice, according to Brecker, that didn't begin then, but a decade earlier, during the height of Flood's baseball career.
He wasn't ever painting. Curtis was really talented. He could draw, he definitely could, but he didn't have the ability to do oils. I was surprised when I first found out about this because I thought he had done that.
Curt said he didn't sleep, then he painted at night and on the road. But this was a guy who spent a lot of his nights partying and with women.
From what he did on the road, I would have never known he was an artist. He would have been painting in the room. No, he was out doing just what everybody else. Go to the bars, have a couple little drinks.
In my belief, my dad didn't have that type of character to be a fraud. Do you understand? That ain't in him. Why would you perpetrate a fraud? He had God-given artistic ability.
One of his business partners told me that Curt was unpacking these portraits finished, out of crates. Another person close to Curt guessed that Carl was painting some of these portraits.
He told me that he didn't do them. I think it started out and then it just grew. People wanted it, he could deliver it. It was like bigger than him. I'm famous for another reason, so I have to keep that going.
But between his drinking and a lack of demand for his work in the late 70s, he couldn't keep the business afloat. Flood was out of options. Cruel timing, considering the economic revolution he'd spawned had burst into full bloom.
He was happy for them. He was unhappy for himself. He thought all these guys would come out of the woodwork and support him.
There were years in which I would explain during spring training meetings the significance of the Flood case and talk about Curt. Sometimes you'd get a quiet clubhouse. Sometimes somebody would say, "Who did he play for?"
Are you bitter about the fact that the players have forgotten?
Do you think they really have forgotten it?
What have they done for you?
Well, actually nothing.
I think the only thing he ever got, Mike Torres gave him the gold chain around his neck. Well, this is for what you've done. Thank you. We all owe you a lot. And he felt they did owe him a lot.
Can anything be done for him in a financial way by the Players Association?
No, I'm afraid not, Howard. The Players Association is a labor organization under the law. The way it expends its funds is severely limited.
I think the biggest loss for him, forget the baseball, was his kids. And he felt guilty about dropping out of their lives for all those years. He thought he was a failure as a father.
The reason I wrote about him was that I was and am fascinated by the people who stand up. I admire them greatly because they're the people who buy the rest of us a little freedom.
But the Curt Flood writer Richard Reeves found in Oakland was, despite the spirit of his lawsuit, far from free himself.
More than once, he broke down and cried and kept saying to me, please don't do this. I don't want to go through all this again. He saw himself as a victim. I saw him as a hero. He saw himself as a victim.
Well, he was a victim, no doubt. He was a victim of a poor decision. He felt bad that he couldn't support his children. He felt bad that he was an alcoholic. He felt bad about what he had done to his life.
I mean, being with this man at that time was like poking your finger in an open wound. He was a broken man and bleeding. He never told a story about the good years. In some way, his unhinging had destroyed those years.
About the only thing Flood had left to turn to was what he'd spent nearly a decade trying to escape: his lawsuit against the game of baseball.
I think it was his entire life. It was going to be the first line of his obituary. And he couldn't take it, but he couldn't let it go either.
Now I have an identity. Now I have to make the most of that identity. I have to do these interviews, repeat this story. You know, I do it all again. There wasn't anything else. That's what he wanted to be remembered for.
Here's the question you get asked most, and I'm going to ask it again. If you had known what you were about to go through, would you have gone ahead with that case?
I think so. It is, in retrospect, very difficult now to remember. Over the years, I've forgotten a little bit, but I think that I would have.
By the mid-'80s, alcohol had dulled Curt Flood's recall, but his baseball pension had at least begun to improve his finances. He left Karen Brecker, but it wasn't long before Flood traded his independence in Oakland for a lost piece of his ever-fading past.
Taking him to the airport to go to spring training for the Senators was the last time I saw him. So fast forward to 1985. He was drinking. And the more he came down, the more I saw there seems to be too much of the drinking.
In terms of his recovery, Judy put her foot down.
He went into a sobriety situation. I told him we were not getting married until he was sober, completely sober.
My dad knew what it was to be addicted to a substance. And he also knew what it was to put that substance out of your life. When he did, the things that were missing in his life were given back.
I think marrying Judy was when he finally sort of found happiness again.
He found a second shot at fatherhood, too, with Pace's 2 young daughters. Flood's new life in Los Angeles also allowed him to begin making things right with his own.
Once he started showing up, once he started giving, it told me that he was sorry, that he did realize there was an absence and damages that he caused. That time in Los Angeles, he truly was my father. He had his footing again and was seeking a life.
First on Sports Look, Curt Flood. In an irony of cosmic proportions, Curt Flood has become commissioner of a baseball league.
Indeed.
How did that happen?
Well, it's a very long story.
Sober after so many years, Flood also found a path of re-entry into the baseball world. He took a job as commissioner of the fledgling Senior Professional Baseball League and began reconnecting on the field with his pals from the glory days.
To see him at an Old Timers game, bannering with Bob Gibson and having fun, to see that was wonderful.
It was like old times. I remember playing over in Esterville, Iowa. That's the place where they have the Field of Dreams. And they had this guy who pitched for that team in the movie. And he ended up hitting Curt right in the middle of the back. Umpire told him to take his base, and he said, no. Stood there and hit. And the next pitch he hit a home run.
There's a drive, deep left.
He would always say, don't try to make my life a Greek tragedy. I'm living happily ever after.
For baseball's forgotten man was starting to get acclaim for the act which had shaped his odyssey.
The NAACP is proud to present its first Jackie Robinson Sports Award to Mr. Curt Flood.
But it was when the players went on strike in 1994 that Flood received the audience he craved the most.
I thought it was very important for the player leadership at the time to talk with Curt. Thought it would be helpful in the negotiations to be stronger, perhaps.
And so it was, nearly 25 years to the day after addressing a group of skeptical player reps in Puerto Rico, that Curt Flood finally spoke to them again.
When he came in, he got a standing ovation. And that's all he wanted.
When he began to tell me about that experience, he began to cry. I said, you didn't really believe that they loved you that much, did you? He says, no, I didn't believe that they knew me. Curt really felt that I got it together now. Baseball had embraced him again. It seems like in life, sometimes you're given a space where you are going to be happy for a while. But the person that's given that space knows that it's not going to last. We were in Dallas at the All-Star game. The second day there, he was hacking, coughing. And he says, I just had this real sore throat. I can't seem to kick it.
When we got back into LA, we went to a doctor at UCLA. They came back that afternoon and said it was cancer.
He said, I guess the drinking and the smoking finally caught up with me. Then he said, I'm going into the hospital to have an operation. It was an operation to remove his larynx, his esophagus.
My baseball career is just starting.
Curt Flood's voice.
I just couldn't imagine losing this case.
Some of the guys that are making a lot of money right now know exactly why.
Over the course of his life, it turns eloquent.
Prejudice is not only confined to the southern part of our United States.
Defiant.
A well-paid slave is nonetheless a slave.
And confounding.
People say, why you? I asked the same question. Why was it me?
Had been silenced. Small comfort, perhaps, was the response of the group who'd benefited from his determined stand decades before.
It was as if they got in bed with him and took his hand and said, don't worry about anything. Richard Moss stepped up to the plate.
I helped convince the union to pay for his medical expenses because his insurance coverage had lapsed.
When Curt heard that, tears came to his eyes because he felt that they did appreciate what he had done. But it was sad that it was at the end of his life before they really showed appreciation to what he had given up.
It was his birthday. We had gone up to the hospital. He was very sick, and he knew it. And he tried to be there for us, if you can imagine. And 2 days later, he was gone. Just like that.
Baseball didn't change Curt Flood. Curt Flood changed baseball.
what a ball player he was. And one of the best friends that you could have.
Don't cry alone.
Curtis had a really hard life. He was a tormented soul, I think. I mean, you can't say a bad word about him. So he didn't paint the paintings, who cares? He was really a good guy.
Curt is the winner. The court's lost. Curt won. Let him rest. Fought the good fight.
My feelings about my father are not so much that he is my father, but a combination of how everybody feels about him. I lived in this dual understanding all my life. I still do. I'm a lot more at peace with it because whatever he lacked as a father, his legacy makes up for it.
I'd like to note the Curt Flood Act, which is the baseball antitrust bill named after Curt Flood, who died just a day or so ago.
Just 59 when he died, Curtis Charles Flood lived a life filled with no shortage of identities. But in the years since his death, he finally has settled into the one he yearned for most.
Curt Flood, he sacrificed his whole career.
He's the reason we had free agency.
Exactly.
It's a fitting legacy, even if, as Flood's life suggests, the truth is a bit more complicated.
People think Curt Flood was the guy that broke the reserve system. Technically, that's not so.
I don't see him as being fundamentally different from George Toolson or other people that took a shot at baseball's reserve system. They all lost, but the others, there was no mechanism to keep the issue alive. By the time Curt Flood comes along, the Players Association already has this front and center in their sights.
But Curt Flood permits you to see it as a moral issue. And it's important for you to see it as a moral issue. He did that for you in a way that Messersmith, McNally, and all those early free agents would not have done it for you.
He is the one that implicated, you don't have a right to own me forever. Curt started all of this. So anybody that says otherwise, I would say quit it.
I mean, what was Lincoln really like? It doesn't matter. What he did is what matters. You're dealing with the nature of heroism. The fact that any one of us might do this gives us a little more power when we face the man or the establishment. And the guys who threw away their lives to do that, we owe a great deal to.
Do you feel you have a place in baseball history? And if so, is it important to you?
It is important to me. As important as doing what I did was. I don't think I will be forgotten very soon because I was one of the first to stand up and say, hey, at one point in your life, you ought to be able to control your career. And that's what it was all about.
This has been a presentation of HBO Sports.